The planet didn't collapse. An alien whose touch burns everything reached out, and a human didn't pull away. How that choice saved hundreds and nearly destroyed them both starts now. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, subscribe to help this channel grow, and stay with us. The story begins now. Pyrath-Ka didn't welcome visitors. The planet's surface shimmered with heat waves that bent light into liquid mirages, and the air carried the metallic tang of volcanic ash. Most species avoided it. The Piri had no choice. Siray then stood at the edge of the thermal regulation platform, her copper-dark skin marked with luminous fissures that pulsed faintly with each breath. She was beautiful in the way a live wire is beautiful, dangerous, untouchable. Where her bare feet touched the metal grating, frost-resistant alloy warmed by several degrees. She monitored magma flow readings with practiced detachment, her amber eyes tracking data streams that most organic beings couldn't process without neural augmentation. The work kept her focused. Focused meant controlled. Controlled meant safe. The ashfall enclave sprawled below, a patchwork of thermal-resistant habitats clinging to the caldera's edge. Humans worked there, Piri lived there. They didn't mix, for good reason. Caleb Rourke arrived on the morning transport, boots hitting the landing platform with the heavy certainty of someone who'd walked through worse. 40 years of industrial work had left him broad-shouldered and practical, with calloused hands that looked like they'd been carved from the same rough stone as the planet itself. His forearms bore the silvered marks of old burns, tissue that had healed wrong and stayed that way. Medical scanners flagged the nerve damage, reduced thermal sensitivity, a liability in most professions. Here, it made him useful. He didn't look around with the wide-eyed nervousness of most human arrivals. He simply picked up his equipment case and walked toward the maintenance sector like he already knew where everything was. Their first crossing was brief. Siray then was descending from the platform. Caleb was heading up. 3 seconds of shared space in a narrow corridor. She pressed herself against the wall, giving him maximum clearance. He nodded once, a gesture so casual it barely registered, and continued past. No flinch, no stare, no questions. She found herself watching his back as he disappeared around the corner, puzzled by the absence of fear she'd learned to expect. 3 hours later, a dissipation vent in Sector 7 started cycling irregularly. Minor issue, routine fix. Siray then adjusted her monitoring station to observe remotely. Caleb was already there, toolkit open, working with the unhurried efficiency of someone who'd done the job 1,000 times. She watched his scarred hands move through the repair sequence, watched him test the temperature differential with his bare palm, holding it there longer than thermal safety protocols recommended. He made the adjustment. The system stabilized. He packed his tools and left without reporting it to anyone. Siray then's fingers hovered over her console. She should log the repair. Standard procedure. Instead, she found herself pulling up his personnel file. Former orbital metallurgist, survived industrial fire. 3 colleagues didn't. Voluntary transfer to thermal environments. Psych evaluation. Functional, but emotionally distant. Preferred assignment. Anywhere no one asks questions. She closed the file. Outside her window, the lava flows pulsed with the planet's slow heartbeat. Somewhere in the enclave, a man with dead nerves in his hands was settling into quarters designed for people who'd learned to live with being alone. 2 kilometers apart, separate by design. Neither of them knew the alarm would sound in 18 hours. Neither of them knew a child would be screaming, and neither of them knew that the distance between danger and choice was exactly the length of one outstretched hand. The alarm cut through the night cycle like a blade. Thermal breach in Habitat Module 4. Population 63. Structural collapse imminent. Caleb was already moving when the second alarm sounded. Fire suppression failure. He knew that sound. Knew what it meant when suppression systems went offline in a superheated environment. He arrived at the module to find controlled chaos. Piri emergency responders stood at the safe perimeter, their internal temperatures already spiking from stress. Getting closer would turn them into additional heat sources. In a collapsed habitat with rising temperatures, that meant death for anyone trapped inside. A hybrid child, maybe 6 years old, was pinned under a support beam in the residential section. The girl's mother was screaming in a language Caleb didn't speak, but desperation needed no translation. The human coordinator was arguing with the PRI team leader. Heat levels already exceeded human tolerance by 40%. Sending someone in was suicide. Caleb walked past them both. The heat hit him like a physical wall. His scarred forearms immediately began to redden, nerves that still worked sending delayed pain signals. He pushed forward, following the sound of the child's crying. The girl was conscious, terrified, trapped but not crushed. Caleb crouched beside her, assessing. The beam was partially supported by debris, if he could shift the angle. He wrapped his hands around superheated metal. There was pain. There was always pain. But pain was just information, and he'd learned years ago how to keep moving while his body screamed. The beam shifted. The girl scrambled free. Caleb grabbed her, shielding her smaller body with his larger one as he moved toward the exit. From her monitoring station 300 meters away, Sirey then watched it happen in real time on thermal imaging. Watched a human shape enter an environment that should have incapacitated him in seconds. Watched him stay. Watched him carry the child out. She was running before she realized she'd moved. By the time she reached the perimeter, Caleb was on his knees, the child safe in her mother's arms. His hands were already blistering, skin bright red and beginning to peel. He was shaking. Not from fear. From the body's involuntary response to trauma, it didn't fully feel. A medic tried to approach him. Caleb waved them off, focusing on controlling his breathing. In, out. Wait for the shaking to stop. Standard procedure he'd learned in the aftermath of the orbital fire. Sirey then stood frozen at the edge of the crowd. She could see the pattern of his scars now, old burns layered beneath new ones. Could see the way he held his hands away from his body, not from pain but from the knowledge of what pain meant. He hadn't gone in because he was brave. He'd gone in because he'd already burned before, and he knew he could survive burning again. Their eyes met across the distance. For the first time in her life, Sirey then felt something more terrifying than guilt. She felt the crushing weight of watching someone hurt themselves, and knowing that if she'd been the one to try the rescue, her proximity would have killed the child faster than the fire. Caleb looked away first, stood, accepted the medic's attention with the tired patience of someone who'd done this before. Sirey then returned to her station, but that night she accessed the Enclave's medical feeds, bypassing privacy protocols she'd never broken before. Watched the treatment logs, watched them catalog the damage. Second and third degree burns on both hands and forearms, damage to previously damaged tissue. Healing time, 6 to 8 weeks. Permanent scarring, likely. Prognosis, he'd do it again without hesitation. She closed the feed and stared at her own hands, luminous fissures pulsing in the darkness. She'd spent 34 years learning to be harmless. He'd spent 40 years learning that harm wasn't a reason to stop. The difference felt insurmountable. The difference felt like a question she didn't know how to ask. The official reprimand arrived 48 hours after the rescue. Caleb read it once, filed it, and went back to work with his hands wrapped in sterile bandages that made fine motor control difficult, but not impossible. The unofficial warning came from Administrator Yeneth, a career bureaucrat who'd perfected the art of couching threats in concern. "We appreciate initiative, Rourke, but unauthorized entry into hazard zones creates liability issues." She paused, reviewing her tablet. "Particularly when thermal exposure incidents involve proximity to PRI personnel." Caleb looked at her. The kid was 20 meters from the nearest high responder. "Nevertheless, we maintain separation protocols for everyone's safety." Her smile was thin. "I'm sure you understand." He understood that she was telling him to stay away from Sirey then, without saying the name. He nodded and left. For the next week, Sirey then made sure they never occupied the same space. She rerouted her monitoring rounds, took meals at off hours, accessed maintenance sectors only after confirming his schedule. It should have been easy. The Enclave was designed for separation, but the absence of him became its own presence. She'd catch herself looking for him in corridors he wasn't walking, listening for the particular rhythm of his work, the methodical sounds of someone who didn't rush because rushing led to mistakes. On the 8th day, she broke her own pattern, entered a thermal elevator during shift change, realized too late that he was already inside. The doors closed. 40 seconds to the lower level. No emergency stop. No escape. They stood on opposite sides of the small space. Caleb's bandages had been replaced with synthetic skin patches, pale against his tanned forearms. Saray-then's fissures pulsed slightly faster. Stress response. Involuntary. 30 seconds. She could feel the heat radiating from her own body, a few degrees higher than her baseline. The confined space was warming, not dangerously, not yet, but noticeably. 20 seconds. "Sorry," she said quietly. "I'll take the next one if you're going down again." "It's fine." 15 seconds. The silence stretched. She could leave it there, should leave it there. Instead, she heard herself ask, "Why don't you fear me?" The question hung in the air between them. Caleb looked at her directly for the first time since the rescue. His expression was hard to read. Tired, maybe, or just honest. 10 seconds. "Fear's cheap," he said. "Doesn't cost anything to be afraid. Doesn't help anything either." 5 seconds. "I could hurt you just by standing here," she said. "You're not hurting me." The elevator stopped. The doors opened. He waited for her to exit first. She didn't move. "The child's mother thanked me," Saray then said, "for maintaining safe distance during the emergency. She thanked me for not getting close enough to help." Caleb's jaw tightened, just slightly. "That's not your fault." "Isn't it?" The words came out sharper than intended. "I'm the thing everyone's being protected from." He stepped forward. Not close, but closer than protocol allowed. Close enough that she could see the tired lines around his eyes. Close enough that her skin temperature rose another degree. "You didn't make yourself dangerous," he said. "Someone else did that. You're just trying to survive it." The observation landed like a diagnosis. Clinical. True. Unbearable. Saray then stepped out of the elevator. Walked 3 steps. Stopped. "You should have let someone else save that child." She didn't turn around, didn't need to. She could feel him still standing in the doorway, holding it open. "No one else was moving," Caleb said. The door started to close. His voice followed her down the corridor. "I don't regret burning for things that matter." She made it back to her quarters before her thermal regulation failed. Locked the door, pressed her palms against the heat-sink walls, and let her temperature climb until the metal turned cherry red beneath her hands. She'd spent her life learning not to touch, learning that distance was kindness, learning that the space around her was a gift she gave everyone else. He'd spent his life learning that pain wasn't the end of choice. She didn't know which one of them was wrong. She didn't know if it mattered. Saray then found solace in the observation deck at the Enclave's southern rim. The transparisteel viewport overlooked a lava field that flowed like a slow river of light, beautiful and lethal in equal measure. At night, she came here to watch something as dangerous as herself exist without apology. She didn't hear him approach. The deck was supposed to be empty during off hours. When she turned, Caleb was standing 3 meters back, hands in his pockets, synthetic skin patches catching the volcanic glow. "Sorry," he said. "Didn't mean to intrude. I can leave." "No!" The word came out too quickly. She steadied herself. "It's a public space." He nodded, but didn't come closer. Just stood there, looking out at the lava flows with the same calm assessment he brought to broken machinery. They watched in silence for a while. Not comfortable exactly, but not hostile. Saray then felt her thermal regulation normalize, her fissures dimming to their baseline luminescence. "Can I ask you something?" Caleb said finally. "Yes. Do you want to be untouchable?" The question bypassed every defense she'd constructed. Direct, simple, devastating. "It doesn't matter what I want," she said. "Biology isn't a preference." "That's not what I asked." Saray then looked at him then, really looked. He wasn't challenging her, wasn't trying to fix anything. He was just asking a question no one had ever thought to ask before. "No," she said quietly. "I don't want to be untouchable. I want to be safe. There's a difference." Caleb walked forward, slowly, 2 meters, 1.5. He stopped just outside the radius where her elevated body heat became noticeable. He extended his hand. Palm up, open, waiting. "I know your touch burns humans," he said. "I know it's not controllable. I know it'll hurt." Siri then stared at his outstretched hand like it was a trap. "Then why?" "Because you shouldn't have to be untouchable." He kept his hand steady. "You should get to choose." Panic crashed through her. Old memories. A pure-eye child, 6 years old, hugging her adoptive mother too tight during a nightmare, the woman's scream, the smell of burning flesh, the child's lifetime of isolation that followed. Siri then had been at the memorial service, had seen the way everyone looked at the girl, not with hatred, with fear, with inevitability. "I'll hurt you," she said, voice cracking. "I know. Not a little, not something you can just heal from." She was shaking now. "I'll burn you bad enough that you'll carry the scars forever." "I'm already carrying scars forever." He tilted his head slightly. "At least these ones would be my choice." Sarai then took a step back, then another. Her fissures flared bright, temperature spiking with her emotional distress. "You don't understand what you're asking." "Then explain it to me." "I'm asking you to hurt yourself for nothing, to damage yourself for someone who can never." She couldn't finish. The words tangled with want and terror and 34 years of conditioning that said caring meant destroying. Caleb lowered his hand, but he didn't step back. "It's not for nothing," he said. "And you're not nothing." From the shadows near the entrance, another figure watched. Kelthar, younger than Siri then, had been observing Caleb for days, watching a human deliberately choose proximity, watching someone not run. Hope was dangerous for the Puri. Hope meant believing connection was possible. Hope meant the crushing weight of being disappointed when biology won. But watching Caleb stand there, hand still half raised, waiting for nothing he might ever receive, Kelthar felt something shift. Not hope exactly, but its shadow. The suggestion that maybe isolation wasn't inevitable. Maybe it was just easy. Saray then fled the observation deck, ran through corridors designed to keep her kind separate, locked herself in her quarters and stood in the emergency coolant shower until the temperature differential made her gasp. But for the first time in her life, running felt like cowardice instead of kindness. For the first time, she wanted to go back. She didn't. Not that night. But she wanted to. And want, she was learning, was its own kind of burning. Caleb found the message waiting in his work queue 3 days later. Medical facility, time slot reserved, no explanation, just coordinates and a timestamp. He arrived to find Sarai then already there, standing rigid near a monitoring station like she was bracing for execution. A medical technician was setting up thermal sensors, clearly uncomfortable with whatever he'd been asked to facilitate. "1 second, Saray then said without preamble. "I'll touch your hand for exactly 1 second. Medical monitoring will track the damage. If it's as bad as I think—" She didn't finish. Caleb understood. "If it's as bad as I think, you'll finally understand why this is impossible." He sat in the designated chair, rolled up his sleeve. The synthetic skin patches had mostly dissolved, leaving fresh scarring beneath. He placed his hand palm up on the examination surface. "You sure about this?" the technician asked. "No," Saray then said honestly, "but I'm doing it anyway." She'd prepared for hours. Meditation techniques to regulate emotional response, thermal dampening exercises. She'd brought her body temperature down to the lowest safe level for her biology. It still wasn't safe for his. She sat across from him, extended her hand, stopped. Last chance to change your mind, she said. Caleb met her eyes. I haven't changed my mind about anything. She touched him. Pain was immediate. Not the delayed signal his damaged nerves usually sent, but sharp and present. Heat transfer at a cellular level. Her skin against his felt like touching a live heating element. 1 second. 2. The medical sensors shrieked warnings. Caleb didn't pull away. His jaw clenched. Sweat broke out across his forehead. But he didn't move. Circe then yanked her hand back at exactly 1 second, stared in horror at the contact point. The skin of his palm was already reddening, blistering at the edges. Second-degree burn from a single second of contact. There, she said, voice hollow. Now you know. The technician was already applying emergency treatment. Caleb watched him work with detached curiosity, like the burn belonged to someone else. Now I know what? He asked. That I'm dangerous. That this is impossible. That you should stop. I know it hurts, Caleb interrupted quietly. I already knew that. What I know now is that you touched someone, and they're still alive. Circe then stared at him. The technician paused his work, caught by the strange weight of the statement. In Pure Eye culture, touch was synonymous with harm. Proximity was violence. The fact that Caleb wasn't screaming, wasn't dying, wasn't even angry, felt like rewriting fundamental physics. You're burned, she said. I've been burned before. He flexed his hand experimentally, testing the damage. I'll be burned again. This one means something. It means I hurt you. It means you chose to try. He looked at her fully then, and something in his expression made her throat tight. Do you know how many people never choose to try? Kelthar, watching from the observation room, felt that shadow of hope solidify into something more dangerous. If one human could survive contact, could others? Could the Pyri actually touch the galaxy without destroying it? The medical report filed automatically. Burns consistent with pure eye contact. Voluntary exposure. No permanent damage expected. The report that filed to the Administrative Council was different. Unauthorized physical contact between species. Protocol violation, potential precedent for dangerous behavior. Within 6 hours, Caleb received a formal summons. Disciplinary hearing. 3 days. Circe then received the same summons. The message was clear. Your attempt at connection is now evidence against you. That night, she stood at the observation deck again. Alone. Her hand still felt strange. Not burned. Not damaged. But different. Like she'd touched something and it hadn't shattered. Like maybe she wasn't only destruction. The thought terrified her more than any amount of isolation ever had. Because isolation was safe. Isolation was certain. But this possibility that she could touch and not destroy, this meant she'd been choosing loneliness all along. This meant she could have chosen differently. The weight of that realization felt heavier than any heat she'd ever carried. The hearing room was designed for comfort, neutral temperature, soft lighting, chairs positioned to suggest collaboration rather than judgment. It made the proceeding feel worse somehow, like they were being gently suffocated instead of openly condemned. Dr. Vectis presided, human, late 60s, the kind of scientist who wore his credentials like armor against emotion. He pulled up the medical report, images of Caleb's burned palm rotating in holographic detail. This was avoidable, Vectis said, not angry, worse than angry, disappointed. It was voluntary, Caleb replied. Voluntary harm is still harm, Mr. Rourke. Vectis turned to Circe then. And you enabled it. I participated in it, she corrected. There's a difference. Vectis sighed, pulled up another file, this one older, genetic data, Piri, baseline physiology. Do you know why your species emits thermal energy through emotional proximity? He asked. Circe then hesitated. It's biological, part of our evolution. No. Vectis expanded the genetic map. Highlighted sections glowed red. It's engineering, deliberate modification performed 8 generations ago by the Varath Collective. They were developing biological weapons. soldiers who could kill with touch. The project was abandoned. The modified population was left to survive on Pyrath Ka because no one wanted to deal with them. The room went silent. "You're telling me," Sire then said slowly, "that we were made this way? On purpose?" The thermal emission scales with emotional attachment," Vectis continued. "It's a control mechanism. The closer you feel to someone, the more dangerous you become to them. It ensured the subjects could never form bonds, never organize, never become anything except isolated individuals." Sire then felt something crack inside her chest. The cultural practices, the isolation protocols, they're not protecting others from us. They're continuing the original design, Vectis finished. "Yes, your entire society was built on trauma programming. You were taught to fear your own emotions because someone wanted you weaponized and controllable." Caleb leaned forward. "Then why are you maintaining the protocols?" Vectis's expression hardened. "Because the danger is still real. Regardless of how it originated, pure high thermal emission causes harm. These protocols prevent tragedy. Tragedy like what?" The question hung in the air. Vectis pulled up another file. Personal, not part of the formal record. A photograph. A young human, maybe 25, smiling next to a Piri woman who was clearly trying to regulate her temperature down for the picture. "My son," Vectis said quietly. "Thomas." He believed connection was possible. Believed if they were careful, if they tried hard enough. He closed the file. The Piri woman didn't mean to hurt him. She was sleeping, dreaming. Her thermal regulation failed for less than 30 seconds. He never woke up. The weight of the revelation crushed the room's air. "I'm sorry," Sire then whispered. "I don't want your apology. I want you to understand that good intentions don't override biology. My son chose connection. It killed him." Vectis looked at Caleb. "If you continue this path, the same will happen to you." Caleb's voice was quiet but steady. "With respect, Doctor, your son didn't fail. The system that told him he could only connect by hiding who he was, that's what failed. He died. He died trying. That's different than dying from not trying at all." In the observation gallery, Kelthar watched the proceedings with growing agitation. The revelation about Piri origins was spreading through the community. Generations of imposed isolation, revealed as social engineering. The anger was building, but so was something more dangerous, the desperate hope that if the isolation was artificial, maybe connection was possible after all. Kelthar had been watching Caleb for weeks, watching a human choose pain for the possibility of contact. If humans could survive touch, even damaged, scarred touch, what did that mean for Piri who'd never tried? The hearing ended with a mandate. No further physical contact between Caleb Rourke and Sire, then. Violation would result in immediate termination of both contracts and permanent separation. Sire then walked out feeling like she'd been unmade. 34 years of believing her isolation was mercy, revealed as manipulation. 34 years of protecting others, when maybe she'd just been protecting a weapon system someone else had built. She found Caleb in the corridor. They weren't supposed to speak, weren't supposed to be near each other, but the rules felt thin now, translucent against the weight of what they'd learned. "They didn't teach us to control the heat," she said. "They taught us to be afraid of feeling." Caleb nodded. "Fear's a good cage. Doesn't need locks." "I don't know how to stop being afraid." "You already started," he said. "You touched me. That was choosing something besides fear." She wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that 1 second of contact could matter against 8 generations of programming. But want had never been enough to change biology. Had it? The separation order was enforced immediately. Caleb was reassigned to deep maintenance sectors. Sire then's monitoring duties were restructured to eliminate any overlap. Vectis made it clear, this wasn't punishment. It was protection. From themselves, from each other, from hope. For 3 days, they complied. Caleb worked through shifts with methodical silence, Saray then regulated thermal systems like the machines they were, avoiding any thought about what they represented. Distance, safety, control. The illusion shattered on the fourth day. Kelthar had been planning for weeks, watching, learning. If a human with damaged nerves could survive pure eye touch, then maybe a human with normal sensation could too. Maybe the key wasn't avoiding contact, maybe it was choosing it. The human's name was Marcus Webb. Young, optimistic, new to the Enclave. He'd been kind to Kelthar during orientation, offering casual friendliness that no one had shown a pure-eye before. Kelthar approached him in a quiet corridor, explained the theory, showed him the medical data from Caleb's controlled touch, asked if he'd be willing to try. Marcus, foolish and brave and 23 years old, said yes. The touch lasted 2 seconds. Marcus's scream brought emergency responders at a run. By the time they arrived, he was unconscious. His entire hand burned to 3rd degree, shock setting in from the pain his nervous system wasn't designed to tolerate. Kelthar stood frozen, staring at what he'd done. Not meaning to, not wanting to, but doing it anyway because biology didn't care about intention. Saray then heard about it through emergency channels. Felt the news like a physical blow. This was what happened when pure eyes stopped accepting isolation. This was the inevitable result of hope. She found Caleb in his quarters, knocked, didn't wait for permission. The separation order didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered except the crushing confirmation that she'd been right all along. "Did you hear?" she asked. "Yeah." "That could have been you. That would have been you if we'd tried anything more than 1 second." Caleb sat on the edge of his bunk, hands clasped. "It wasn't me. Because we stopped. Because the protocols worked. Because isolation is the only thing that keeps us from destroying everyone who makes the mistake of caring about us." Her voice cracked on the last words. Caleb looked up, saw her standing in the doorway, fissures blazing with emotional distress, temperature climbing, becoming the very thing the protocols were designed to contain. Kelthar asked someone who wasn't prepared. Caleb said quietly, "Someone whose body couldn't handle it. That's not the same as what we did." "It's exactly the same. We just got lucky." Saraythan's hands were shaking. "I am a weapon someone built. You are a man who's survived enough damage. Neither of those things makes connection possible. It just makes the inevitable tragedy take longer." "So what? You're giving up?" "I'm accepting reality. I should have accepted it 34 years ago instead of pretending I could be anything except dangerous." Caleb stood, took a step toward her. She backed away immediately, hand raised in warning. "Don't," she said. "I'm not controlled right now. I could hurt you without meaning to. You've always been able to hurt me. You chose not to. Choice isn't enough. Vectis was right. His son chose connection. It killed him. Marcus chose to help. He's in medical now with burns that might never heal. Choice doesn't override biology." "Then what does?" Caleb's voice rose for the first time. Not in anger, in something more desperate. "You just accept that you'll be alone forever? That every pure eye will die without ever being touched? That's not safety. That's just slow extinction. It's the only kind we get." The words fell between them like a wall. Final. Absolute. Caleb's expression shifted through emotions too quick to track. Anger, frustration, grief, then something harder. Colder. "Fine," he said. "You want to hide? Hide, but don't pretend you're doing it for anyone except yourself." The accusation hit like a physical blow. Saray then stared at him, eyes wide. "You think I want this? You think I chose to be untouchable? I think you're choosing it right now. You're letting 8 generations of trauma programming tell you what's possible. You're letting one accident define every interaction. You're doing exactly what the people who made you wanted. You're giving up. I'm being realistic. You're being afraid." The truth of it detonated in the small space. Saray then felt her thermal controls slip. Temperature spiking. The room's ambient heat climbing. Caleb didn't move, didn't flinch. Just stood there, taking the heat, proving some point she didn't want proven. "Get out," she said. "Saray then. Get out before I hurt you by accident, before I prove you wrong the hard way." He left. She locked the door, activated emergency cooling, let the temperature differential crash over her until her fissures dimmed to near darkness. Marcus Webb spent 8 hours in medical before stabilizing. The burns would scar, might limit hand mobility permanently. Kael'thar was placed under psychiatric observation, not because he'd done something malicious, but because hopelessness was a contagion among the Puri. Vectis filed a report recommending immediate implementation of stricter isolation protocols. The Puri population was demonstrating dangerous ideation. Connection attempts were increasing. Tragedy was inevitable without intervention, and in the deepest maintenance sector, Caleb Rourke sat alone, staring at his scarred hands, wondering if the difference between choosing pain and choosing loneliness was just another lie he told himself to feel brave. The alarm that sounded 18 hours later would answer that question. None of them would like the answer. The core thermal regulator had been failing for weeks. Small fluctuations, nothing critical, the kind of gradual degradation that maintenance logs tracked but didn't prioritize, until it wasn't gradual anymore. The alarm woke the Enclave at 0300. Critical failure in the primary heat exchange system. Secondary systems compensating. Estimated time to cascading collapse, 90 minutes. Everyone knew what that meant. Pyroth Ka's volcanic activity was artificially stabilized by the regulator network. If the core failed, the entire caldera would destabilize. The Enclave would be buried in lava before evacuation could complete. Population at risk, 473. The solution was technically simple. Manual reset of the core interface. 3 separate control nodes had to be activated simultaneously, while someone maintained system pressure from the central valve. The problem was heat. The core chamber operated at temperatures that would incapacitate most species in seconds, kill them in minutes. The control nodes were positioned too far apart for any kind of remote manipulation. It required 2 people, 1 Puri to handle the nodes without dying from the heat, 1 baseline humanoid to maintain the central valve, which required fine motor control the Puri's heat-resistant suits couldn't provide. It required trust, physical proximity. The exact thing the protocols were designed to prevent. Vectis stood in the emergency command center running scenarios. Every simulation came back with the same answer: not possible. The Peri assigned to the core chamber would raise the ambient temperature through their presence alone. The human assigned to the valve would experience thermal trauma within 30 seconds. Unless the human was someone whose nerves were already damaged, someone who could tolerate heat longer than normal, someone stupid enough to volunteer for what was clearly a suicide mission. "Get me Rourke," Vectis said. Caleb arrived 12 minutes later, listened to the situation, nodded once. "I'll do it. You'll likely die," Vectis said bluntly. "Even with your reduced sensitivity, core chamber temperatures will cause catastrophic tissue damage within 3 minutes. The reset sequence takes 8. Who's running the nodes?" "That's the other problem. The only Puri with sufficient training is Saray then, and her thermal emission will make your situation worse." Caleb looked at him. "How much worse?" "You might not survive the first minute." "Might not? Definitely won't." The silence stretched. Somewhere in the Enclave, evacuation alarms were beginning to sound. 473 people, families, children, the girl he'd pulled from the habitat collapse, all of them depending on the same impossible choice. "Ask her," Caleb said. Saray then refused. "I won't watch you die," she told the emergency coordinator. "Send someone else. Anyone else. There is no one else. You're the only Puri rated for core operations. Then let it fail. I won't kill him." The coordinator pulled up casualty projections. Children, elders, the maintenance staff who'd shown her nothing but careful kindness for years, all of them burning. "If you refuse," the coordinator said quietly, "they die anyway." Kael'thar appeared in the command center doorway. Behind him, 3 other Piri. All of them looked exhausted, defeated, but present. "We'll do it," Kael'thar said. 4 of us. We can coordinate the nodes. Find another human for the valve." "You're not rated for core operations," Vectis said. "Then rate us now. We've been isolated our whole lives, told we were too dangerous to work together. But if we can't cooperate now, what was the point of surviving this long?" It was a reasonable plan. It might work, but the simulations gave it a 30% success rate. With Siray and Caleb, someone who knew the systems intimately and someone who could tolerate the impossible, the rate jumped to 65%. Still not good, but better than everyone dying. Caleb found Siray in her quarters. She wouldn't look at him. "I know you're scared," he said. "You'll die. Maybe, probably, but here's the thing." He sat on the floor across from her, far enough away to be safe, close enough to be heard. "I've spent 10 years working thermal zones, spent 40 years existing in a body that hurt. I'm not afraid of pain anymore. I'm just tired of wasting it." "This isn't a waste." 400 people, Siray, then. Some of them are kids. You think they should die so you don't have to feel guilty about saving them? That's not fair. No, it's not. Nothing about this is fair. Not what was done to you. Not what's being asked of us now. But fair doesn't matter when the lava's coming. Siray then finally looked at him. Her fissures pulsed erratic patterns, fear and grief and something harder to name. "If you die because of me, then I died choosing something I thought mattered. That's more than most people get." In the command center, Vectis watched the countdown. 70 minutes to collapse. He thought about his son, about the Piri woman who'd killed him without meaning to, about the decades he'd spent building protocols to prevent the same tragedy. He'd succeeded. The protocols worked. People stayed separate, safe, alone. And now everyone was going to die because safety had made them incapable of working together when it mattered. The irony was almost funny. Siray and Caleb stood at the core chamber entrance. The door was 3 meters thick, heat-resistant alloy glowing faintly from what waited behind it. "Last chance," she said. "You can still choose different." Caleb pulled on thermal gloves that wouldn't help. "So can you." The door opened. Heat poured out like a living thing. Caleb walked into it without hesitating. Siray then followed. Behind them, the door sealed. Inside the chamber, 8 minutes to save everyone or die trying. Together. The way they'd been designed to never be. The core chamber was hell-made functional. Temperature readings maxed out thermal sensors at 451 degrees Celsius. The air itself seemed to burn, superheated and thick with the planet's volcanic breath. Caleb felt his lungs scorch on the first inhale. His synthetic skin patches began degrading immediately. This was beyond his tolerance, beyond anyone's tolerance. He moved toward the central valve anyway. Siray fissures blazed white-hot, her body automatically trying to regulate against external heat by releasing more. The paradox of her biology. The hotter the environment, the hotter she became, trying to maintain equilibrium. In the core chamber, she was a walking furnace. "First node," she called out, voice tight. "Northwest quadrant, 90 seconds. Caleb reached the valve. It required constant manual pressure, a dead man's switch that couldn't be automated. He wrapped his gloved hands around the wheel. The gloves began to smoke. Siray then moved to the first node. Every step closer to Caleb increased the ambient temperature around him. She could see his skin reddening through his protective gear, could smell burning fabric. She activated the node. Hydraulic systems screamed to life. "Second node," she said. "East wall. 120 seconds." Caleb's vision was starting to blur. Heat exhaustion hitting fast. His damaged nerves were finally catching up with the reality his body was experiencing. Pain came in waves now, delayed, confused, but definitely present. He held the valve steady, watched readings climb toward critical. 60%. 70. Siray then reached the second node. It was positioned closer to the central valve, closer to Caleb. Activating it meant standing 3 meters from him while her body emitted heat that would make his situation lethal. She looked at him. He was swaying, hands locked on the valve through sheer will. His face was bright red, blistered. He met her eyes, nodded. She activated the second node. The temperature around Caleb spiked. His protective gear began to fail. The wheel was burning his hands even through the degrading gloves. He felt skin peeling, felt nerves that had been dead for years wake up just to scream. He didn't let go. "Third node," Sarai then choked out. "Southern array, 30 seconds. 80%, 90. The third node was positioned directly opposite the valve, which meant Sarai then would be furthest from Caleb, which meant if she activated it, she'd have to run back across the chamber while the system cycled. And if the timing was off by even seconds, the whole thing failed, which meant someone had to hold the valve for the entire sequence, which meant Caleb had to survive another 3 minutes in temperatures that were actively killing him. Sarai then reached the third node, put her hand on the activation panel, looked across the chamber at Caleb. He was collapsing, knees buckling, hands still locked on the valve, but his body failing beneath him. She could see the way his chest struggled for air, could see him dying in real time. "I can't," she whispered. But her hand moved anyway, activated the node. The system began its final cycle. The valve required constant pressure for another 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Caleb was operating on something beyond consciousness now. Some part of his brain that remembered the orbital fire, that remembered holding someone while they burned, that had learned the difference between letting go and choosing to hold on. Sarai then ran, crossed the chamber, reached Caleb as he started to fall, caught him, felt his weight shift onto her, felt her own temperature spike from the emotional response of watching him suffer for her, felt herself become the very thing that would kill him. "No," she gasped. "No, stay awake. Stay with me." Caleb's eyes opened, barely. Still. Choosing. "This is killing you." Worth. It. 95%. Sarai then made a choice she'd avoided her entire life. She stopped trying to pull away, stopped trying to minimize contact. Instead, she wrapped her arms around Caleb, supporting his weight, holding him upright so his hands could stay on the valve. Her touch burned him. Not incidental contact, not accidental. Direct, sustained. Her temperature climbed with fear and grief and desperate love. Every second she touched him was another scar he'd carry forever. She held on anyway. "Look at me," Caleb rasped, blood in his mouth from heat-damaged lungs. "Look at me while this happens." She did. "I'm choosing," he said. Clearer now. Some final reserve of strength. "Choosing. This. You. All of it. 99%. Sarai then felt something break open in her chest. Not pain. Something harder to name. The weight of 34 years of isolation shattering against the reality of someone choosing to burn rather than let her be alone. 100%. The system locked. Pressure stabilized. Core temperature began dropping. Caleb collapsed. Sarai then caught him, lowered him to the superheated floor. His hands were ruined. Third-degree burns over most of his palms and forearms. His face was bright red, breathing shallow and labored, but alive. The chamber door opened. Emergency medical teams rushed in, tried to separate them. Sarai then wouldn't let go, held Caleb's broken body against hers, her heat still radiating, still dangerous, still everything she'd been taught to control. "I'm sorry," she whispered into his hair. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Caleb's eyes opened one more time, focused on her, and impossibly, he smiled. "Don't be," he breathed. "Best burn I ever got." Then he passed out. The medics took him. Sarai then stood alone in the core chamber, hands still warm from holding someone who'd chosen her over safety. Outside, the Enclave's alarms went silent. The thermal regulator stabilized. 473 people would wake up alive. 2 of them would carry scars they'd chosen together, and 1 of them would finally understand that being untouchable was never about biology. It was about being too afraid to let anyone close enough to try. Caleb spent 6 weeks in medical. The burns were extensive, 3rd degree across both palms and up to his elbows. Permanent nerve damage, scarring that tissue regeneration could minimize but never erase. His right hand lost 30% mobility. Fine motor control compromised. He'd never work thermal zones again. The doctors delivered the prognosis like an apology. Caleb just nodded. He'd known the cost before walking into the chamber. Knowing didn't make it easier, but it made it his. Siray then visited once, stood in the doorway of his room, unable to come closer. They looked at each other across 3 meters of space that felt wider than the core chamber had. "I'm sorry," she said. "Stop apologizing for things I chose. Your hands are mine, my scars, my choice." He flexed the right hand experimentally. The movement was stiff, wrong. They work well enough. She wanted to argue, wanted to catalog every way she'd damaged him, but the words died when she saw his expression. Not regret, not anger, just tired acceptance of the price he'd paid for something he still believed mattered. "The protocols are being revised," she said instead. "Vectis is dismantling the isolation requirements. After what we did, after we proved cooperation was possible." She trailed off. "They're calling it the Ashfall Amendment. Piri and humans working together. Supervised contact, trained response." "But that's good. It's because of you. What you survived showed them it was possible." Caleb shook his head. "It's because of you. You chose to try. That's what changed things." The silence stretched, comfortable almost. The kind of silence that exists between people who've seen each other at their worst and somehow still choose to be in the same room. "I'm leaving," Caleb said finally. "Contract's done. Medical discharge. They're sending me back to orbital work. Light duty. Nothing thermal." Something in Siray then's chest collapsed. "When?" 3 days. She nodded, turned to leave, stopped. "Thank you," she said, "for showing me I was wrong." "About what?" "About being untouchable." She looked back at him. "You taught me the difference between can't and won't. I spent my whole life thinking I couldn't connect. Turns out I was just too afraid to try." She left before he could respond. The next 2 days passed in administrative efficiency. Caleb packed his minimal belongings, completed exit interviews, signed medical waivers acknowledging the permanent damage and releasing the Enclave from liability. On the final evening, he went to the observation deck. Old habit. The lava flows below glowed in familiar patterns. Beautiful destruction on an endless loop. He felt her before he saw her. The subtle change in air temperature that meant to Piri was close. Siray then stood beside him. Closer than protocol recommended, not touching, but near enough that he could feel warmth radiating from her skin. "I wanted to give you something," she said, "but I don't have anything except—" She extended her hand, stopped just short of contact, palm up, waiting. Caleb looked at her hand, at his own ruined hands, at the space between them that had defined their entire relationship. He reached out, touched her palm with his fingertips. The heat was immediate. His damaged nerves screamed warnings his body barely processed anymore. It hurt. It would always hurt, but beneath the pain was something else. Connection, choice, the simple, impossible fact of skin against skin. They stayed that way for exactly 3 seconds. Not long enough to cause serious damage, long enough to matter. Siray then pulled back first, looked at the faint marks her heat had left on his fingertips. New burns layered over old scars. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be." Caleb smiled. Tired, real. "Best 3 seconds of the whole deployment." She laughed. The sound was broken. "Beautiful. You're insane." "Probably." He looked out at the lava. "But I don't regret burning for things that matter. Never have. Never will. I don't know how to do this, Sirey then admitted. Connection, touch, any of it. I'm going to hurt anyone who gets close. Yeah? You will. Caleb's voice was matter-of-fact. And they'll hurt you too. That's how it works. People damage each other. The question isn't whether it'll hurt, it's whether it's worth hurting for. She stood beside him in silence, processing, deciding. The Ashfall Amendment includes provisions for cross-species collaboration, she said carefully. They're looking for Piri willing to work with human partners on thermal regulation projects. Long-term assignments, it's dangerous. But someone has to try. You volunteering? If I did. She hesitated. Would you come back? Not now, after you've healed. If there was a position that needed someone who understood heat, who wasn't afraid of contact, who was stupid enough to… Yes. She looked at him sharply. I didn't finish asking. Don't need you to. Answer's yes. You don't even know what the work is. Don't care. If you're trying, I'm trying. That's the deal. Sirey then felt something warm unfold in her chest. Not heat. Something gentler. Hope, maybe. Or just the recognition that loneliness was a choice she could finally stop making. It won't be easy, she warned. Nothing worth doing ever is. They stood together watching the lava flows until the transport departure alarm sounded. When they separated, Sirey then pressed something into his hand, a small heat-resistant data chip. Protocols for controlled contact, she said. Research I've been doing, ways to minimize thermal transfer. If you're coming back, you should know what we're working with. Caleb closed his scarred hand around the chip. I'll read it. And Caleb? She met his eyes. Thank you for not treating me like danger. He thought about all the things he could say, about how she'd never been the danger, about how the system that built her was the real enemy, about how choosing to try was the most human thing anyone could do. Instead, he said the only thing that mattered. Never was. 6 months later, Caleb Rourke returned to Pyrath Ka. His right hand still didn't work properly. Probably never would. But it could hold tools, could operate systems, could reach out when reaching out mattered. The Ashfall Protocol was in full effect. Piri and humans working side by side. Not perfectly, not without incident, but together. Learning the difference between isolation and safety. Learning that care sometimes burned. Learning that burning didn't mean stopping. Sirey then met him at the landing platform. She didn't touch him, but she stood close enough that he felt her warmth. Close enough that the space between them was a choice instead of a mandate. Ready? She asked. Caleb looked at his scarred hands, thought about all the ways he'd burned, all the ways he'd survived burning, all the ways he'd choose to burn again if it meant something. Yeah, he said. Let's go to work. They walked into the enclave together, two people who'd been told connection was impossible, two people who'd chosen to try anyway, two people who'd learned that humanity's greatest strength wasn't avoiding pain. It was looking at pain, knowing exactly what it cost, and saying, even so, I stay. Across the galaxy in 1,000 isolated communities, Piri saw the broadcasts, saw humans and their kind working together, saw touch that burned but didn't destroy, saw connection that cost everything and was worth it anyway. They saw proof that the cages they'd been given had keys. The keys were just terrifyingly simple. Choose, try, burn, stay anyway. In the end, humanity was never defined by avoiding pain, danger, or loss. It was defined by the strange, stubborn decision to stay, fully aware of the cost, because meaning has never been found in safety alone. If connection always carries the risk of burning, why do we keep reaching out anyway? At what point does protecting ourselves turn into quietly disappearing from the lives we could have lived? And if scars are inevitable, how do we decide which ones are worth carrying? This story isn't really about aliens, heat, or distant planets. It's about us. about every moment we choose between isolation and effort, between fear and presence, about how courage often looks less like heroism and more like someone saying with a tired smile, "Yeah, this is going to hurt. I'm staying anyway." So if you stayed until the end, write "burn" in the comments, not as destruction, but as proof that you believe some things are worth the risk. Tell us where you're watching from. This story crossed stars to reach you after all. If this journey meant something, subscribe, like, hype it up, and share it with someone who's afraid to reach out right now. And when the final card appears on your screen, don't leave yet. There's another story waiting, asking the same dangerous question. What would you choose if staying was harder than leaving?